Sarah Martinez stood at the edge of the military training ground, clutching her grandfather's weathered hunting rifle. The metal was worn smooth from decades of use, and the wooden stock bore scratches and dents that told stories of countless hunting trips in the mountains of Colorado. While other recruits carried sleek, modern firearms issued by the military, Sarah held on to the old Winchester that had belonged to her family for 3 generations. The morning sun cast long shadows across the dusty terrain as drill instructors barked orders at the new batch of recruits. Sarah had arrived at the elite military training facility just 2 days ago, one of only 12 women selected from thousands of applicants for the specialized marksman program. The program was known for producing some of the finest snipers in the armed forces, and the competition was fierce. "Look at that antique," whispered Jake Morrison, a cocky recruit from Texas who had been making Sarah's life difficult since day one. He nodded toward her rifle with a smirk. "Did she find that in a museum?" His comment drew snickers from several other male recruits who had formed a tight circle around him. They were all carrying state-of-the-art rifles with advanced scopes and modern accessories. Sarah ignored the comments, just as she had been doing for the past 2 days. She was used to being underestimated. Growing up in a small mountain town, she had faced similar attitudes from boys who thought girls couldn't shoot. Her grandfather, Miguel Martinez, had taught her differently. He was a Vietnam veteran who had served as a reconnaissance specialist, and he had passed down not just his rifle, but his knowledge of marksmanship and survival. "That old piece of junk probably can't hit the broadside of a barn," continued Jake, raising his voice so others could hear. "Maybe she should have stayed home and learned to cook instead." The group erupted in laughter, and Sarah felt her cheeks burn with embarrassment and anger. What they didn't know was that Sarah had been shooting since she was 8 years old. Every weekend, her grandfather would take her into the wilderness, teaching her to track animals, read wind patterns, and make impossible shots across vast distances. The old rifle had dropped elk at 400 yards, and in Sarah's hands, it was as precise as any modern weapon. The training facility sprawled across 50,000 acres of rugged terrain in Nevada, designed to simulate various combat environments. Mountains, desert, urban areas, and forested regions provided the perfect testing ground for future military snipers. The program lasted 8 weeks, and only half of the recruits were expected to graduate. The physical and mental demands were brutal, designed to weed out anyone who lacked the discipline and skill needed for elite military service. Sergeant Williams, the head instructor, approached the group with his clipboard. He was a weathered man in his 50s with steel-gray hair and eyes that seemed to see everything. "All right, recruits, today we start with basic marksmanship assessment. You'll each take 10 shots at targets placed 200 yards away. This will establish your baseline accuracy before we begin advanced training." The recruits lined up at the firing positions, each one equipped with sandbags and shooting rests. Sarah found herself positioned between Jake and another recruit named David Chun, a quiet young man from California who had been kind to her since arrival. The targets were standard military bullseyes, black circles on white backgrounds that looked deceptively small at the 200-yard distance. "Ladies first," Jake said with mock courtesy, gesturing toward the firing line. "Let's see what that museum piece can do." The other recruits chuckled, but Sarah noticed that Sergeant Williams was watching the interaction with interest. His expression was unreadable, but she sensed he was evaluating more than just their shooting skills. Sarah approached her shooting position with confidence. She had made this exact shot thousands of times, though usually at much greater distances while hunting. She settled into position, adjusting the familiar weight of her grandfather's rifle against her shoulder. The weapon felt like an extension of her body, every curve and surface worn to fit her perfectly. She peered through the old iron sights, the same ones her grandfather had used in Vietnam. While the other recruits relied on high-powered scopes, Sarah trusted her eyes and instincts. She controlled her breathing, feeling her heart rate slow as she entered the focused state her grandfather had taught her. The world around her faded away until there was only the target. The rifle and the gentle squeeze of her finger, the first shot rang out. And Sarah already knew it was perfect before the spotter called out the result. "Bull's eye center ring," came the announcement over the loudspeaker. A murmur of surprise rippled through the group of observers. Jake's confident smirk faltered slightly, but he quickly recovered. "Lucky shot," he muttered, loud enough for others to hear. "Let's see if she can do it again." Sarah's second shot followed the first into the center of the target. Then the third, fourth, and fifth. Each bullet found its mark with mechanical precision, creating a tight cluster in the center ring that would have been impressive with any rifle, let alone the old Winchester she carried. The laughter and comments from the male recruits gradually died away as Sarah continued her demonstration. By her eighth shot, the range had fallen completely silent except for the crack of her rifle and the spotters' increasingly amazed calls of "bull's eye," "center ring." Jake had stopped smirking entirely and was staring at Sarah's target in disbelief. The other recruits watched with a mixture of respect and confusion. How was someone with such an old rifle outperforming those with modern equipment? Sarah fired her ninth shot, another perfect hit. As she prepared for her final shot, she noticed that even Sergeant Williams had moved closer to observe. The gruff instructor's eyes were fixed on her technique. Watching how she handled the old rifle with practiced ease, the 10th shot completed a nearly perfect group. All 10 bullets clustered within a circle smaller than a quarter. The range erupted in applause from the instructors and a few of the more sporting recruits. Jake and his followers remained silent, their earlier confidence shattered by Sarah's display of skill. As Sarah stood and cleared her rifle, she caught Sergeant Williams watching her with a strange expression. It wasn't just respect for her shooting ability, there was something else in his eyes, a recognition that seemed to go beyond her performance on the range. He studied her face intently, as if trying to place her in a memory from long ago. The foundation had been laid, and Sarah had proven that the old rifle in her hands was far from obsolete. Word of Sarah's perfect shooting spread through the training facility like wildfire. By evening, recruits from other platoons were coming by to see the girl with the old rifle who had outshot everyone on the range. The dining hall buzzed with conversations about her performance, and Sarah found herself the center of attention for the first time since arriving. Jake Morrison sat at his usual table, picking at his food and avoiding eye contact with anyone. His earlier confidence had evaporated completely, replaced by a sullen embarrassment that was obvious to everyone around him. The recruits who had laughed along with his jokes now kept their distance, not wanting to be associated with someone who had been so thoroughly proven wrong. "That was incredible shooting today," said David Chun, sliding his tray across from Sarah at the dinner table. "I've never seen anything like it. Where did you learn to shoot like that?" His genuine curiosity was refreshing after days of dealing with Jake's hostility. Sarah smiled, grateful for the friendly conversation. "My grandfather taught me. He's been taking me hunting since I was a kid. This rifle belonged to him when he served in Vietnam." She gestured toward the weapon case beside her chair. Even off the range, she kept the rifle close, as much for sentimental reasons as for security. "Vietnam?" David's eyes widened with interest. "My grandfather served there too, but he never talked much about it. Most of those guys don't like to discuss what they went through over there." Sarah nodded, understanding completely. Her grandfather Miguel had taken years to open up about his military service. Even now, there were stories he refused to tell, memories too painful to share. But he had taught her everything about marksmanship, fieldcraft, and survival that the military had taught him. Those lessons had clearly paid off today. Sergeant Williams entered the dining hall and surveyed the room with his usual stern expression. When his eyes found Sarah's table, he approached with purposeful strides. The conversations around them died down as other recruits noticed the instructor heading their way. "Martinez," he said gruffly, stopping beside their table, "I need to speak with you privately after you finish eating. Meet me in my office in 20 minutes. Without waiting for a response, he turned and walked away, leaving Sarah wondering if she was in trouble for something. "What do you think that's about?" David whispered once the sergeant was out of earshot. Sarah shrugged, though she felt a knot of anxiety forming in her stomach. No idea, maybe he wants to discuss my equipment or something. That rifle is pretty old for military training. 20 minutes later, Sarah knocked on the door of Sergeant Williams' office. The small room was spartanly decorated, with military commendations on the walls and a desk covered in training schedules and recruit evaluations. The sergeant gestured for her to sit in the chair across from his desk. "That was impressive shooting today, Martinez," he began, settling into his chair. 10 for 10 at 200 yards with iron sights? Most recruits can't do that with modern scopes. His tone was professional, but Sarah detected something else underneath, a curiosity that went beyond her performance. "Thank you, sir. My grandfather trained me well," she replied. Sitting at attention, Williams studied her face for a long moment before speaking again. "Tell me about this grandfather of yours. You mentioned he served in Vietnam. What unit was he with?" "He was with the 5th Special Forces Group, sir." "Reconnaissance specialist. He served 3 tours between 1967 and 1971. Sarah had memorized these details from the stories her grandfather had shared over the years. The sergeant's expression changed subtly, and Sarah noticed his hands tense slightly on the desk. "What was his name, recruit?" "Miguel Martinez, sir." "Staff Sergeant Miguel Martinez." Sergeant Williams sat back in his chair, his eyes wide with recognition. For a moment he seemed lost in thought, as if accessing memories from decades past. When he spoke again, his voice was softer, almost reverent. "I knew a Miguel Martinez in Vietnam. Served with him briefly in 1970 when my unit worked with Special Forces on a reconnaissance mission near the Cambodian border." He paused, studying Sarah's features more carefully. "You have his eyes and apparently his gift for marksmanship." Sarah felt a chill run down her spine. Her grandfather had mentioned working with regular Army units during his tours, but he had never shared specific names or details. "You knew my grandfather, sir?" "I was just a young sergeant then, barely older than you are now." "Your grandfather saved my life during an ambush?" "He took out 3 enemy snipers at distances I thought were impossible, using a rifle very much like the one you carried today." Williams stood and walked to his window, looking out at the darkened training grounds. "He never mentioned your name." "Sir, but he didn't talk much about specific missions," Sarah said carefully. She sensed there was more to this story than the sergeant was revealing. Williams turned back to face her, his expression serious. "Your grandfather was more than just a good shot, Martinez. He was one of the finest soldiers I ever served with. His courage under fire was legendary, even among Special Forces. The fact that you're here, carrying his rifle and shooting with his precision, tells me you inherited more than just his weapon." The conversation continued for another 30 minutes, with Williams sharing carefully chosen stories about her grandfather's service. Sarah learned details about Miguel's military career that he had never shared with his family, commendations for bravery, successful missions behind enemy lines, and the respect he had earned from both officers and enlisted men. As Sarah prepared to leave the office, Sergeant Williams called her back. "Martinez, I want you to know that you've earned your place in this program through your own merit. Your shooting today was exceptional by any standard, but knowing who trained you gives me confidence that you have the character and determination to succeed here." Walking back to her barracks, Sarah felt a new sense of pride and purpose. The other recruits who had mocked her rifle now treated her with respectful nods and genuine interest in her background. Jake Morrison was nowhere to be seen, reportedly having requested a transfer to another training program. Her roommate, Lisa Thompson, was waiting with excited questions about the meeting with Sergeant Williams. Sarah shared what she could about the conversation, leaving out the more personal details about her grandfather's service. As she cleaned and stored her rifle before lights out, she thought about the legacy she was carrying forward. The old Winchester had proven its worth on the range, but more importantly, it had connected her to a family history of service and sacrifice. Her grandfather's training had prepared her not just to shoot accurately, but to represent the values he had instilled in her: courage, determination, and quiet competence. The next morning brought new challenges and more advanced training exercises. But Sarah faced them with increased confidence, knowing that she had already proven herself worthy of the program. The rifle that had once been a source of mockery was now viewed as a symbol of her unique background and exceptional skill. As the weeks progressed, Sarah's reputation continued to grow. Her consistent performance on increasingly difficult shooting challenges earned the respect of instructors and fellow recruits alike. But she still had no idea that her connection to Sergeant Williams ran deeper than either of them yet realized. 3 weeks into the program, the training had intensified dramatically. What had started as basic marksmanship had evolved into complex scenarios involving moving targets, adverse weather conditions, and extreme distances. Sarah found herself consistently ranking among the top 3 performers in every exercise, often outperforming recruits with years more experience. The advanced training facility included a 1,000-yard range carved into the side of a mountain, complete with variable wind conditions and elevation changes that challenged even experienced marksmen. Most recruits struggled to hit targets consistently at such distances, but Sarah adapted quickly, drawing on lessons her grandfather had taught her about reading environmental factors. "Wind speed is picking up from the southeast," she murmured to herself, adjusting her position on the rocky outcrop that served as her shooting platform. Below her, a series of targets had been placed at various distances, simulating the kind of long-range engagement scenarios that military snipers might face in combat. Sergeant Williams watched from the observation tower, binoculars trained on Sarah's position. Beside him stood Commander James Mitchell, a Navy SEAL who had arrived unexpectedly that morning to observe the training. Mitchell was a legend in special operations circles with over 20 years of experience and numerous classified missions to his credit. "She's something special," Williams commented as Sarah fired her first shot, striking a 600-yard target dead center. "Reminds me of her grandfather's natural ability, but she's already surpassing what he could do at her age." Commander Mitchell lowered his binoculars and looked at Williams with interest. "Her grandfather? You mentioned he was Special Forces in Vietnam. What was his name again?" "Staff Sergeant Miguel Martinez, 5th Special Forces Group. Served with distinction from 67 to 71. I had the privilege of working with him briefly in 1970. Williams kept his eyes on Sarah as she adjusted for her next shot. Mitchell's expression changed, a flicker of recognition crossing his features. "Miguel Martinez. That name sounds familiar. Was he involved in any classified operations during his tours?" Williams shrugged. "Most of what Special Forces did back then was classified to some degree. Miguel was involved in reconnaissance missions behind enemy lines, but the specifics were above my pay grade at the time." On the range below, Sarah had moved to a more challenging position, engaging targets at 800 yards while dealing with shifting wind patterns. Her shots were finding their marks with mechanical precision, each adjustment calculated and deliberate. The old rifle seemed to sing in her hands, its familiar weight and balance allowing her to achieve results that amazed the instructors. "That's 8 consecutive hits at 800 yards, reported the range safety officer through the radio. "Martinez is maintaining sub-minute of angle accuracy despite the wind conditions." Other recruits had gathered at the observation points to watch Sarah's performance. What had started as curiosity about the girl with the old rifle had evolved into genuine admiration for her skill. Even the most competitive recruits couldn't deny that she was operating on a different level. David Chun stood among the observers, shaking his head in amazement. "I don't understand how she makes it look so easy. I can barely hit the 600-yard targets with a modern scope, and she's nailing 800-yard shots with iron sights." Lisa Thompson, Sarah's roommate, beamed with pride. "She practices every morning before the rest of us wake up. I hear her outside doing dry fire exercises and working on her breathing techniques. She's dedicated in a way that goes beyond just wanting to pass the course." As Sarah prepared for her final shots at the maximum 1,000-yard distance, Commander Mitchell moved closer to the observation window. These were targets that challenged even experienced snipers with the best equipment available. The fact that a recruit was attempting such shots with a Vietnam-era hunting rifle bordered on the absurd. Sarah settled into her shooting position, factoring in the increased wind drift and bullet drop at the extended range. She had made shots this long while hunting elk in the Colorado mountains, but never under the pressure of formal evaluation. Her grandfather's voice echoed in her memory. "Trust your training, Mia. Trust the rifle. Trust yourself." The first shot at 1,000 yards struck slightly left of center, still within the scoring ring, but not the perfect hit she had been achieving at shorter distances. Sarah made a small adjustment and fired again. This time, the bullet found the exact center of the target, drawing impressed whistles from the observers. "Incredible," muttered one of the instructors. "That's a shot most of our graduates couldn't make reliably." Commander Mitchell had gone quiet, his expression thoughtful as he watched Sarah complete her final shots. All three found their marks, with two hitting dead center and the third just slightly high. For a recruit using iron sights at maximum range, it was a performance that defied explanation. As the training exercise concluded and recruits began cleaning their weapons, Mitchell approached Sergeant Williams with a serious expression. "I need to speak with you privately about Martinez. There's something about her grandfather's service record that I think you should know." They walked to Williams' office in silence, both men processing what they had witnessed on the range. Sarah's shooting was beyond exceptional. It was the kind of natural talent that appeared maybe once in a generation. Combined with her obvious dedication and training, she was developing into exactly the kind of marksman the military needed for its most challenging missions. "What do you know about Operation Phoenix?" Mitchell asked once they were alone in the office. Williams frowned. "The classified program that targeted enemy leadership? I know it existed, but the details were way above my clearance level." "Miguel Martinez was more than just a reconnaissance specialist," Mitchell said carefully. "He was one of the primary marksmen for Phoenix operations in his sector, some of the most difficult and sensitive missions of the war. His shooting ability was legendary even among special operations units." The revelation hit Williams like a physical blow. He had known Miguel was skilled, but the full extent of his capabilities had been classified far above Williams' level at the time. "Are you saying Sarah's grandfather was basically a military sniper?" "One of the best we ever produced," Mitchell confirmed. "His success rate on long-range precision missions was nearly perfect. The rifle skills you're seeing in his granddaughter aren't just inherited talent. They're the result of training by someone who was at the absolute pinnacle of the profession." Outside the office, Sarah was showing other recruits proper cleaning techniques for her grandfather's rifle. She had no idea that her family history was being discussed, or that her grandfather's service had involved far more than the stories he had shared. The old Winchester had secrets of its own, having served in missions that would remain classified for decades to come as the sun set over the training facility. Sarah felt a deep satisfaction with her day's performance. She was proving that dedication and proper training could overcome any equipment disadvantage. But more importantly, she was honoring the legacy of a grandfather who had given her more than just shooting lessons. He had instilled in her the values and discipline needed to excel under pressure. Commander Mitchell watched from his office window as Sarah crossed the compound, rifle case in hand. Tomorrow would bring new challenges and even more difficult tests of her abilities. The 5th week of training brought unexpected changes to the program. Commander Mitchell had requested to personally evaluate several top-performing recruits, including Sarah, in scenarios that went far beyond standard military training. These exercises were designed to simulate real-world special operations conditions, complete with time pressure, multiple targets, and life-or-death decision-making. Sarah stood in the pre-dawn darkness outside the advanced training facility, checking her equipment one final time. Her grandfather's rifle was clean and ready, the familiar weight of it providing comfort as she prepared for the most challenging test of her military career. Around her, 5 other top recruits made their own preparations, each selected for their exceptional performance during the previous weeks. "Today's exercise will test more than your shooting ability," Commander Mitchell addressed the group. His voice carried the authority of someone who had led men in actual combat. You'll be working in pairs to complete a series of precision shooting tasks while under simulated combat stress. Speed, accuracy, and tactical thinking will all be evaluated. Sarah had been paired with Marcus Webb, a former Marine who had joined the program after 2 tours in Afghanistan. Webb was skilled with conventional weapons but had initially been skeptical of Sarah's unconventional equipment choice. However, her consistent performance had earned his respect, and they had developed good communication during previous team exercises. "Your mission," Mitchell continued, "is to neutralize a series of targets positioned throughout the mountain training area. Some targets will be stationary, others will be moving. You'll have limited ammunition and no backup support. Radio communication will be jammed except for emergency situations." The course stretched across 12 miles of rugged terrain, with shooting positions that required climbing, crawling, and navigating through dense forest. Each team would face different target sequences, ensuring that no one could benefit from watching others complete the course first. As Sarah and Marcus moved to their starting position, she noticed Commander Mitchell watching her with particular interest. There was something in his expression that went beyond normal evaluation, an intensity that suggested this test had personal significance for him. "Why do I feel like we're being watched extra closely?" Marcus whispered as they checked their maps and planned their route. Sarah had noticed the same thing. "Maybe because of my equipment. Command probably wants to see if the old rifle can handle advanced tactical scenarios." She kept her voice low, not mentioning the growing sense that there was more to this evaluation than anyone was admitting. The starting signal came, just as the sun crested the eastern mountains, casting long shadows across the training area. Sarah and Marcus moved quickly through the initial terrain, using natural cover to approach their first shooting position. The targets were small steel plates positioned at various ranges, designed to simulate enemy combatants in realistic tactical situations. Their first engagement required Sarah to make 3 shots at 400 yards while Marcus provided security and spotted for wind conditions. The targets were partially concealed behind obstacles, requiring precise shot placement to achieve hits. Sarah settled into position, grateful for the countless hours she had spent practicing in similar mountain terrain. The old rifle performed flawlessly, each shot finding its mark despite the challenging angles and partial concealment of the targets. Marcus shook his head in amazement as they moved to their next position. "I don't understand how you make those shots look so easy. That last target was barely visible behind that tree trunk." "My grandfather taught me to see the shot before I take it," Sarah replied, scanning ahead for their next objective. "He said that by the time you pull the trigger, the bullet should already be hitting the target in your mind." Their progress through the course was steady and efficient. Sarah's shooting was complemented by Marcus's tactical knowledge and experience with movement techniques. They worked as a cohesive team, covering ground quickly while maintaining the precision needed to engage their targets successfully. The most challenging portion of the course came at the halfway point, where they encountered a scenario designed to test decision-making under pressure. 3 targets appeared simultaneously at different ranges, but they only had ammunition remaining for 2 shots. They had to choose which targets represented the greatest threat and engage accordingly. Sarah studied the situation through her rifle scope while Marcus provided tactical assessment. "The furthest target has the best overwatch position," he said quietly. "If this were real combat, that's the one that could do the most damage to friendly forces." Sarah agreed with his analysis. She engaged the distant target first, a difficult shot at 650 yards that required compensation for both wind and elevation changes. The bullet struck true, and she immediately shifted to the second priority target at 350 yards. Another perfect hit left them with 1 target remaining but no ammunition to engage it. "Good tactical thinking," came a voice through their emergency radio. Commander Mitchell had been monitoring their progress, and was clearly impressed with their decision-making process. As they continued through the course, Sarah began to notice that the scenarios were becoming increasingly specific and complex. These weren't standard military training exercises. They seemed designed to test skills that would be needed for the most elite special operations missions. The precision required, the tactical complexity, and the level of fieldcraft needed all pointed to training that went far beyond regular sniper programs. Their final challenge came at a shooting position that overlooked a valley filled with multiple targets at extreme ranges. Some were stationary, others moved on predetermined patterns, and all required perfect timing and shot placement to engage successfully. Sarah had only 4 rounds remaining for what appeared to be at least 6 viable targets. "This is where tactical thinking really matters," Marcus observed, studying the target array through binoculars. "We need to prioritize based on threat level and shot difficulty." Sarah analyzed each potential target carefully. Her grandfather had taught her that the most important shots weren't always the easiest ones, but the ones that had the greatest tactical impact. She selected 4 targets that, if eliminated, would effectively neutralize the entire simulated enemy position. The first shot was at 800 yards against a moving target. Sarah led the target properly, and her bullet intercepted it perfectly. The second was a stationary target at 950 yards, requiring maximum elevation adjustment on her rifle. Again, perfect placement. The third shot challenged everything she had learned about long-range shooting. The target was positioned at 1,100 yards, at the very limits of her rifle's effective range and her own abilities. She factored in wind speed, humidity, temperature, and even the slight rotation of the earth that could affect bullets at such extreme distances. The shot seemed to hang in the air forever before the distant clang of metal confirmed another hit. Marcus let out a low whistle of amazement. That was impossible. There's no way that old rifle should be accurate at that range. The final shot was perhaps the most difficult, requiring her to engage a target that was partially concealed and moving at 700 yards. Sarah waited for the perfect moment when the target would be briefly exposed, then squeezed the trigger with the precise timing her grandfather had drilled into her during countless hunting expeditions. 4 shots, 4 hits, and a course completion that would become the standard by which future recruits would be measured. As Sarah and Marcus made their way back to the staging area, they were met by Commander Mitchell and Sergeant Williams, both wearing expressions of amazement and something else that Sarah couldn't quite identify. "Outstanding performance," Mitchell said formally, but his eyes held questions that went beyond the day's exercise. "Martinez, I need to speak with you privately about your grandfather's service record. There are some details that have recently come to light." Sarah felt a chill that had nothing to do with the mountain air. Whatever Commander Mitchell had discovered about her grandfather's military service was about to change everything. Commander Mitchell's office was located in the secure section of the training facility, an area that most recruits never saw. Sarah sat across from his desk, still wearing her field gear from the morning's exercise, while Sergeant Williams stood near the door with an expression of barely contained excitement and nervousness. "Before we begin," Mitchell said, activating a small device on his desk, "I need you to understand that what we're about to discuss is classified information. You'll be required to sign confidentiality agreements, and this conversation never happened as far as anyone outside this room is concerned." Sarah nodded, though her stomach churned with anxiety. "Sir, is my grandfather in some kind of trouble? Did he do something wrong during his service?" Mitchell's stern expression softened slightly. "On the contrary, Martinez. Your grandfather is a legitimate American hero, but his service record has been classified for national security reasons. What I'm about to tell you will help you understand why your shooting abilities are so extraordinary." He opened a thick manila folder marked with multiple security classifications. Inside were photographs, mission reports, and documents that had been sealed for over 50 years. Sarah recognized her young grandfather in several of the black and white photos, though he looked different, harder, more focused than the gentle man who had taught her to hunt. "Staff Sergeant Miguel Martinez wasn't just a reconnaissance specialist," Mitchell began. "He was one of the primary precision marksmen for the most sensitive operations of the Vietnam War. His official designation was classified, but he was essentially operating as what we would now call a military sniper, though that term wasn't commonly used at the time." Sarah studied the photographs. seeing her grandfather in full military gear, often positioned with the same Winchester rifle she now carried. In one image, he was receiving a medal from a general she didn't recognize. In another, he was teaching marksmanship to other soldiers at what appeared to be a secret training facility. These mission reports, Mitchell continued, pointing to a stack of documents, detail operations where your grandfather eliminated enemy targets at ranges that were considered impossible at the time. We're talking about confirmed kills at over 1,200 yards using the same rifle you carry today. The revelation hit Sarah like a physical blow. Her grandfather had never mentioned combat kills or the true nature of his missions. He had spoken about his service in general terms, focusing on survival skills, marksmanship principles, and the importance of discipline under pressure. Why was this classified? Sarah asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Because Miguel Martinez was involved in operations that officially never happened, Mitchell explained. Cross-border missions, elimination of high-value targets, intelligence gathering in areas where American forces weren't supposed to be operating. The political situation required that these missions remain secret. Sergeant Williams stepped forward, adding his own perspective. Your grandfather saved my life during one of these operations. We were part of a joint mission to eliminate an enemy commander who was coordinating attacks against American bases. Miguel made an impossible shot across a river valley to take out a sniper who had us pinned down. Sarah looked up at Williams with new understanding. You were there when he made that shot? I was the spotter, Williams confirmed. 1,184 yards in crosswinds that should have made the shot impossible. But Miguel had studied that position for 3 days, calculating wind patterns, humidity changes, even the temperature variations throughout the day. When he finally took the shot, it was absolute perfection. Mitchell pulled out another set of documents. After the war, your grandfather was offered positions in various special operations units. He could have made the military his career, probably would have ended up running sniper training programs. But he chose to return to civilian life, to start a family and put the war behind him. He never talked about any of this, Sarah said, still processing the magnitude of what she was learning. He taught me to shoot, told me stories about hunting and tracking, but nothing about combat or military operations. That's exactly what we would expect from someone with his background, Mitchell replied. The best operators often compartmentalized their military service, especially when it involved classified operations. He probably wanted to protect you from the harsh realities of what he had to do during the war. The commander leaned forward, his expression becoming more intense. But here's what's truly remarkable, Martinez. You're demonstrating the same natural abilities that made your grandfather legendary. The shooting performance you showed today wasn't just good. It was at the level of our most experienced special operations snipers. Sarah felt overwhelmed by the implications. Are you saying that this is genetic? That I inherited his shooting ability? Partly, Mitchell acknowledged. But more importantly, you inherited his training methodology? The techniques he taught you for reading wind, calculating distances, controlling breathing and trigger squeeze. Those are advanced military techniques that most snipers take years to master. Williams added, your grandfather was teaching you skills that the military spent millions of dollars developing. He just disguised it as hunting lessons. The room fell quiet as Sarah absorbed this information. Everything about her childhood training sessions suddenly made sense in a new context. Her grandfather's insistence on precision, his detailed explanations of environmental factors, his emphasis on mental discipline, it had all been military training disguised as family bonding time. There's one more thing, Mitchell said, producing a final document from the folder. Your grandfather received the Distinguished Service Cross for actions during a classified mission in 1970. It's one of the highest decorations for valor that the military awards. But because the mission was classified, the award was never made public. The citation described how Staff Sergeant Martinez had single-handedly eliminated an entire enemy sniper team that was threatening a special operations base. Using only his personal rifle and iron sights, he had engaged and neutralized 7 targets at ranges exceeding 800 yards. saving the lives of dozens of American personnel. Sarah felt tears forming in her eyes as she read about her grandfather's heroism. The gentle man who had patiently taught her to shoot at tin cans and paper targets had been a decorated war hero whose actions had saved countless lives. "Why are you telling me this now?" she asked. Mitchell exchanged glances with Williams before responding. "Because we need people with your abilities, Martinez. The skills your grandfather passed down to you are exactly what we need for current special operations requirements. You're not just a good shot, you're potentially one of the finest precision marksmen we've ever evaluated." The conversation continued for another hour, with Mitchell explaining how modern military sniping had evolved since her grandfather's time, but how the fundamental skills remained the same. Sarah's performance during training had caught the attention of special operations commanders who were always looking for exceptional talent. As the meeting concluded, Sarah was given copies of her grandfather's declassified service record and the citation for his Distinguished Service Cross. Walking back to her barracks, she felt a profound connection to family history she had never known existed. That evening, she called her grandfather for the first time since starting the training program. When his familiar voice came through the phone, she could hear it differently now, the voice of a man who had served his country with distinction and valor. "Mia, how is your training going?" Miguel asked, his voice warm with affection. "Grandfather," Sarah said carefully, "I think we need to talk about your time in Vietnam. There are some things I've learned that I'd like to discuss with you." There was a long pause on the other end of the line. When Miguel finally spoke, his voice carried a weight that Sarah was only now beginning to understand. "I suppose it was always going to come out eventually," he said quietly. "Are you ready to hear the whole story?" The phone conversation with her grandfather lasted 3 hours, spanning decades of hidden family history. Miguel Martinez had finally decided it was time to share the complete truth about his military service. Now that his granddaughter was following a similar path, Sarah sat alone in the communications room, taking notes and asking questions about missions that had remained classified for over 50 years. "I never wanted this life for you, Mia," Miguel said, his voice heavy with emotion. "When I taught you to shoot, I hoped you would use those skills for hunting, maybe competitive shooting. I never imagined you would choose the military." Sarah understood his reluctance. The stories he shared painted a picture of a young man thrust into impossible situations, forced to make life-and-death decisions that would haunt him for decades. The precision shooting that had made him legendary in Vietnam had come at a tremendous personal cost. "But I'm proud of what you're accomplishing," he continued. "The reports I'm getting say you're exceeding every expectation. You're using the rifle better than I ever did, and you're doing it with honor and integrity." "Reports?" Sarah asked, surprised. "Who's been giving you reports about my training?" Miguel chuckled, the first light moment in their conversation. "Did you think the military wouldn't reach out to the man who trained their newest sniper prodigy? Commander Mitchell called me yesterday to discuss your progress and to ask permission to share my service record with you." The revelation that her grandfather had been consulted about her training added another layer to the complex web of connections she was discovering. The military didn't just view her as another recruit. They saw her as the continuation of a legacy that had proven invaluable decades earlier. Over the following days, Sarah's training took on new dimensions. Commander Mitchell had arranged for specialized instruction that went far beyond the standard program. She worked with current Navy SEAL snipers, learning modern techniques and technologies while applying the fundamental skills her grandfather had taught her. The old Winchester rifle that had once been a source of mockery was now viewed as a piece of living history. Other recruits asked respectful questions about its capabilities and the man who had carried it in combat. Sarah found herself becoming an unofficial teacher, sharing lessons about fieldcraft and marksmanship that her grandfather had passed down to her. Marcus Webb, her partner from the advanced exercise, sought her out during evening training sessions. "I've been thinking about that shot you made at 1,100 yards, he said. "I've seen military snipers with the best equipment available struggle to make shots at that distance. How did you know you could make it? Sarah considered the question carefully. My grandfather taught me that every rifle has a personality. You have to learn how it behaves under different conditions, how the bullet flies at various ranges. This rifle and I have been working together for years. I trust it, and it trusts me. The concept seemed almost mystical, but Sarah had experienced it firsthand countless times. The old Winchester was more than just a tool. It was an extension of her will, calibrated through thousands of practice shots and hunting expeditions. Modern rifles might have better scopes and more precise manufacturing, but they lacked the intimate familiarity that comes from a lifetime of use. Word of Sarah's exceptional performance had reached the highest levels of Special Operations Command. General Patricia Hayes, commander of all Special Operations training programs, made an unexpected visit to the facility during the 7th week of training. She observed Sarah's performance personally, asking detailed questions about her background and training methodology. "Martinez," the general said after watching Sarah complete a series of precision shots in challenging conditions, "I'm going to be direct with you. We need people with your abilities for operations that go beyond conventional military roles. Are you interested in pursuing advanced special operations training after you complete this program?" The offer was both exciting and intimidating. Sarah knew that accepting would mean committing to a military career that could involve the same kinds of dangerous, classified missions her grandfather had undertaken decades earlier. But she also recognized that her unique skills could make a real difference in protecting American lives. "Can I discuss this with my grandfather before making a decision?" Sarah asked. General Hayes smiled approvingly. "I would expect nothing less. Family input is important for decisions of this magnitude. Take your time, but understand that opportunities like this are extremely rare." That evening, Sarah called Miguel again, explaining the offer and asking for his guidance. Her grandfather was quiet for a long time before responding. "Mia, the choice has to be yours," he said finally. "But let me tell you what I've learned from my years of experience. The military will ask you to do things that will change you forever. Some of those things will be necessary and right. Others will haunt you for the rest of your life." He paused, and Sarah could hear the weight of memories in his silence. "But I also know that people with our abilities have a responsibility. When you can make shots that others can't, when you have skills that can save lives and complete impossible missions, walking away isn't always the moral choice. Sometimes you have to step forward even when you know the cost." Sarah spent the next 2 days considering her options. She spoke with other instructors, researched advanced special operations programs, and carefully weighed the implications of each path. Her fellow recruits noticed her serious demeanor, but respected her privacy as she worked through the decision. On the final day of the marksman training program, Sarah made her choice. Standing before General Hayes and Commander Mitchell, she accepted the offer to pursue advanced special operations training. The decision felt right, honoring both her grandfather's legacy and her own desire to serve her country at the highest level. The graduation ceremony for the marksman program was held on a sunny Friday morning, with families invited to attend. Sarah was surprised and deeply moved when her grandfather made the long journey from Colorado to be present. At 74 years old, Miguel Martinez still carried himself with military bearing, and several instructors approached him with obvious respect and recognition. During the ceremony, Sarah received the highest honors in her class, acknowledged for exceptional marksmanship and leadership potential. When her name was called, she walked across the stage carrying the same rifle that had served her grandfather in Vietnam and had now launched her own military career. After the ceremony, Miguel examined his old rifle with obvious pride and emotion. "She served our family well," he said quietly. "Take care of her, and she take care of you." Commander Mitchell approached them both, extending his hand to Miguel with genuine respect. "Staff Sergeant Martinez, it's an honor to finally meet you properly. Your granddaughter is carrying on your legacy in the most remarkable way." Miguel shook the commander's hand, his eyes showing the mixture of pride and concern that Sarah had come to recognize. "She's exceeded anything I ever imagined possible. But remember, Commander, She's not just a weapon to be deployed. She's a young woman with her whole life ahead of her." The warning was gentle but clear. Miguel had sacrificed much for his military service, and he wanted to ensure that his granddaughter's career would be different. Guided by wisdom he had gained through hard experience, as they prepared to leave the ceremony, Sarah realized that her journey was just beginning. The old rifle had carried her this far, but the path ahead would require everything her grandfather had taught her and more. The legacy of the Martinez family was about to continue in ways that none of them could have imagined. 2 years later, Sarah Martinez stood on the deck of a naval vessel in the Mediterranean Sea, her grandfather's Winchester secured in a custom case designed for maritime operations. She had completed advanced special operations training with distinction and was now serving as a precision marksman with an elite joint task force. The skills Miguel had taught her in the Colorado mountains had evolved into capabilities that made her one of the most sought-after snipers in the military. The mission briefing that morning had been classified at the highest levels. A terrorist cell had taken hostages in a coastal facility, and conventional rescue operations had failed. Sarah's unit was called in to provide precision fire support for a high-risk extraction operation led by Navy SEALs. The shot requirements were at the absolute limits of human capability, multiple targets at extreme range, with innocent lives hanging in the balance. As Sarah prepared her equipment, she noticed a familiar figure approaching across the ship's deck. Commander James Mitchell, now bearing the rank of admiral, walked toward her with the same purposeful stride she remembered from the training facility. However, his expression carried something different, a recognition that went beyond their previous interactions. "Martinez," he said, stopping beside her position, "I need to speak with you before the operation begins. There's something about your grandfather's service that I should have told you years ago." Sarah looked up from her rifle preparation, curious about the timing of this revelation. "Sir, we're scheduled to begin the mission in 30 minutes. Is this something that can wait until after the operation?" Mitchell shook his head, his expression serious. "Actually, it's directly relevant to today's mission. You see, I didn't just serve with your grandfather briefly in Vietnam. He saved my life during a mission very similar to what we're about to undertake." The admiral sat down on an equipment crate, his eyes focused on the distant coastline where their target facility was located. It was 1970, and I was a young Navy SEAL leading my first major operation. We were tasked with rescuing American prisoners being held in a facility near the Cambodian border. The mission was going perfectly until we encountered an enemy sniper position that had us completely pinned down. Sarah continued her equipment check while listening, but Mitchell's story had her complete attention. She had heard variations of this account from her grandfather, though he had never mentioned working with Navy SEALs specifically. "Your grandfather was positioned on a ridge approximately 1,200 yards from our location," Mitchell continued. "The enemy sniper was in a position that made him nearly impossible to see, hidden in dense jungle with perfect fields of fire covering our only escape route. My entire team was going to be eliminated unless someone could make an impossible shot." The admiral paused, studying Sarah's rifle case with obvious recognition. Miguel spent 4 hours studying the position, calculating wind patterns through the jungle canopy, factoring in humidity and temperature changes. "When he finally took the shot, it was with the same rifle you carry today." Sarah felt a chill of recognition. This was the mission her grandfather had mentioned during their long phone conversation, though he had described it as just another tactical operation. She had no idea that the young SEAL officer he had saved would later become the admiral now commanding her unit. "That shot saved 12 American lives," Mitchell said quietly, "including mine. Your grandfather eliminated the enemy sniper with a single bullet fired through a gap in the jungle canopy, no bigger than a dinner plate. It was the most impossible shot any of us had ever seen." The story explained much about Mitchell's interest in Sarah's career and his involvement in her training. This wasn't just about recognizing exceptional talent. It was personal recognition of a debt that had shaped his entire military career. "Sir, why are you telling me this now?" Sarah asked. Mitchell stood and walked to the ship's railing, pointing toward the terrorist facility on the distant shore. Because the shot you're going to need to make today is nearly identical to the one your grandfather made 53 years ago. The target is at extreme range, the angle is challenging, and innocent lives depend on absolute precision. Sarah joined him at the railing, studying the target through binoculars. The terrorist facility was positioned on a cliff overlooking the sea, with hostages being held in a structure that limited conventional assault options. Her role would be to eliminate specific threats at ranges exceeding 1,400 yards, providing cover for the SEAL extraction team. The difference, Mitchell continued, is that today's technology gives us better intelligence and communication capabilities than your grandfather had available. But the fundamental challenge remains the same, making an impossible shot when failure isn't an option. As the mission launch time approached, Sarah felt the weight of family legacy and personal responsibility. The old Winchester had been carried into combat before, had saved American lives under similar circumstances, and was now being called upon to do so again. The rifle that recruits had once mocked was about to prove its worth on the most important mission of Sarah's career. The SEAL insertion proceeded according to plan, with Sarah providing overwatch from her position on the naval vessel. Through her grandfather's iron sights, she could see the terrorist facility clearly despite the extreme range. Years of training and her grandfather's patient instruction had prepared her for this moment. When the call came for precision fire support, Sarah was ready. The first target was a terrorist sniper positioned in a tower that threatened the SEAL extraction route. The shot required compensation for wind, drift over water, elevation changes, and the movement of the ship beneath her feet. Sarah applied every technique her grandfather had taught her, trusting in the rifle that had served their family with distinction. The bullet found its mark with lethal precision. The second shot eliminated another threat, and the third cleared the final obstacle preventing the hostage's rescue. Each shot was delivered with the mechanical accuracy that had become Sarah's trademark, backed by the confidence that comes from using familiar equipment under extreme pressure. As the hostages were successfully extracted and the mission concluded, Admiral Mitchell approached Sarah's position with obvious amazement and respect. "Your grandfather would be incredibly proud," he said simply. "You've just repeated history, using the same rifle to save American lives in remarkably similar circumstances." Sarah carefully secured her rifle, feeling the profound connection to family legacy that had guided her throughout the operation. The old Winchester had once again proven that superior technology couldn't replace the combination of skill, training, and intimate familiarity with equipment. "Sir," Sarah said as she completed her post-mission procedures, "I think my grandfather would say that the rifle is just a tool. What matters is the training, the values, and the commitment to protecting others that gets passed down from one generation to the next." Admiral Mitchell nodded approvingly. That's exactly what he would say. And that's exactly why the Martinez family legacy will continue to serve this country for generations to come. As the naval vessel returned to port, Sarah reflected on the journey that had brought her from a mocked recruit with an old rifle to an elite special operations marksman carrying on her grandfather's tradition of service. The Winchester that had started as a source of ridicule had become a symbol of excellence, precision, and the timeless values that define true military service. The story of the old rifle and the family who wielded it had come full circle, proving that some legacies transcend technology and time.